Hey e-commerce marketing podcast listener, I wanted to let you know that we have created the 6-month guide to marketing your e-commerce store. You can download this guide by visiting getosi.com/guide or by texting getosi to 33444. This guide will show you how to get more traffic, sales, and conversions for your online store. Get the guide right now by visiting getosi.com/guide or by texting getosi to 33444. Welcome to the e-commerce marketing podcast. Today's guest is Tom Schwab, and we're going to be talking about podcast interview marketing. Tom Schwab knows how to build an online business, and marketing at its heart is really about starting a conversation with someone who could be an ideal customer. Tom built his e-commerce business from a regional player to a national leader with this strategy. Now he helps small business owners, entrepreneurs, and solopreneurs turn their listeners into leads by getting them featured on leading podcasts their prospects are already listening to. Tom is the author of Podcast Guest Profit: Grow Your Business with a Targeted Interview Strategy. Welcome to the podcast, Tom. How are you doing?
Hey, Robert, I am thrilled to be here.
Thanks for being here, and I'm excited about talking about podcast interview marketing. But before we get into it, why don't you give us a background about your online business that you're working on that eventually you used podcast interview marketing as a marketing strategy for?
Yeah, so we started a e-commerce business in 2008, 2009, and if anybody remembers back that far, that's when the Great Recession was hitting, and actually we were in Michigan, and the state of Michigan sort of led the country into the recession there. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we saw was we wanted to build this business, but we had to find creative ways to do that. And we were at that time just a regional business, more brick and mortar. And so we thought, well, let's go online. Let's do it more e-commerce. And this was direct-to-patient durable medical equipment. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we saw was that, we didn't have the funds to buy the attention with all the ads. And I went through a phase where we built it with pay-per-click, and I said, this just isn't scalable. And so with that, I had read a book by two smart guys out of MIT called Inbound Marketing. And what they were talking about is using content to get the word out there, mm-hmm. using content to attract visitors and engage leads and really delight customers. And so we used that to take our e-commerce business from a regional player up to a national leader, and then we sold that company. But one of the things we looked at is that content is king, and content used to be just blogs. Now content is all kinds of things. It could be social media posts, it could be videos, or one of the things that we're finding works out best is using podcasts and podcast interviews. Because ultimately, we've all got a great product or service, right? Mm-hmm. It could help somebody, no matter where you are right now. There are people that you could help. The biggest problem that most of us have is that those people don't know about us, right? We're obscure. And so, changing something isn't going to help if they don't know about you. Sometimes I use the analogy of, you could have the best store, but if it's in the Sierra Desert, nobody's going to find it. And changing the sign on the store or anything like that isn't going to help because, you're obscure. So really, you've got to find a way to get your message out there, to go from obscure to acclaimed. And that's one of the things we've seen that's so possible to do with podcast interviews.
Okay, so why don't we jump into it, and you can just lead us and show us how businesses, e-commerce businesses, can start, I'm assuming, start getting interviewed on different podcasts, and then eventually they can use those interviews to start getting customers. But you're the expert, so why don't we jump into it, and then you just let us know how you use podcasts to get more customers and grow your business.
Sure. So podcast interview marketing is really broken down into 6 steps. It's prospecting, pitching, preparation, the performance, progression, and then promotion. And if you don't remember all these, don't worry. Just there's a infographic that explains all of them. So if you're doing different things, you can get this infographic. I'll just put it up at interviewvalet.com eCommerce, and everything that Robert and I talk about will be there. But the first step is really prospecting, right? There's 400,000 podcasts out there. You just want to focus on the ones that your ideal customers are there. So from that standpoint, you don't need to be on every podcast. You don't even need to be on the biggest podcasts. You need to be on the podcast that your ideal customers are listening to. So, for example, somebody the other day told me about pickleball. I had never heard of it before. It's something like tennis, but inside in like a squash court. But whatever, if you were selling pickleball equipment on eCommerce, there's right now 8 podcasts dedicated to pickleball. So you would want to get on those podcasts and start to talk about your products, how you can help. And the same thing if you're selling dog equipment, you'd want to get on pet lover shows, things like that. So trying to prospect and find those shows that your ideal customers are already listening to. So prospecting is the first step. Pitching is the second step, right? So how do you get that host to notice you? And none of us like a cold call, so you want to find a way to make a warm introduction. And Robert, as a podcaster, you know this. If somebody just comes up and says, I want to be on your podcast, probably not. But if they've already reached out to you on social media, if they've listened to some podcasts, maybe if they've shared some stuff, left a rating and review, and then they reach out and say, hey, Robert, I've got this information that could help your audience. That's the right way to do a pitch. The next step, really, after you get the host to say yes, is the preparation, right? This is your time to be in front of your ideal customers, and you want to prepare yourself. So you want to have listened to a couple episodes of the podcast so you know what the flow is, what questions they ask, what the tone of it is. And then the other thing is preparing the host, right? The host is busy. They're not going to spend hours researching you and your company. So make it easy for them. Get them everything they need to know about you. Your job as a podcast guest is not to go there and sell your product. It's really to make the host look like a genius for having you on, right? Because that will get people to know, like, and trust you and get them back to your site. Now, really, the fourth step is the performance. And we even tell all of our clients that this is the one step that you can't outsource, right? So we work with clients and we say, you're the guest, we'll take care of the rest. But they've got to do the performance. And so the performance is doing things like, getting on and telling stories, not just trying to sell something. And it's also giving them more resources. And I'm going to pull back the curtain here and show you exactly how it's done. You've got to do something in order to move people from just being passive listeners to active visitors to your site. And if you remember back, Robert, one of the things I said at the beginning was, hey, there's an infographic that it says all of this, and you can find that back at the website. I could also say that, we've got a checklist that's the 6 secrets to get on your first podcast. Well, that's also, I can put that back on the web page. So these are things that add more value that help move people. So if you want that, the 6 secrets to getting on your first podcast, I'll put that on that same page that I'm making for Robert at interviewvalet.com/eCommerce.
And what's the goal with when you try to turn them from passive listeners to active customers by you pointing them to that web page or telling them to go here? What's the goal with that action?
Right, and that's really it's to progress them along in the relationship and the sale. And we've done a lot of testing with this. We've had over 3,000 different podcast interviews, over 200 different clients. And what we found is that when you're on a podcast, you just don't want to send somebody to your welcome page or to your homepage, right? Because that's going to change with time. We're recording this in 2017, but chances are there's somebody now in 2020 that's listening to Robert and I for the first time. Now, if the homepage is changed on your e-commerce site, you're going to lose them. Better to send them to a dedicated page and not just go for the sale from the very beginning, but give them other ways to say yes. Sometimes in the progression, we talk about our clients to give them 3 ways to say yes. A small yes, a medium yes, and then heck yes, I've got credit card in hand. I'm going to buy something. So like here, I talked about, the checklist, the infographic. Well, the heck yes could be if you want to work with Interview Valet, if you want to download the free book or go to Kindle and buy the book, having all of those things on the page, and you're trying to get them to move from listeners to visitors to leads and ultimately customers. And so that's sort of that progression. You don't want to just say, go to my e-commerce store and buy. No, give them a reason to go there. And then also, we call it a welcome page because it's not like a typical landing page or a squeeze page where it's, buy this, do this, or just leave. No, we want them to get there, get involved. And, if you want to see what a page looks like, this will be a great example, interviewvalet.com/e-commerce. And I'll tell you what you're going to see on that page when we make it. You have no idea who Tom Schwab is. You've never seen me. You've never been to my website, but you know who Robert is, and you know what the podcast, e-commerce marketing podcast, looks like. So the first thing that you're going to see there is going to be trust seals, right? Not a Better Business Bureau or anything like that, but Robert's picture, because like, and trust him. It's going to be the e-commerce marketing podcast logo there. So you're going to think, oh, okay, I'm in the right place. And then it's just going to go through and talk about, if you're on this page, it's because you heard Robert and I talking on the podcast. Here's the things we talked about on the podcast. So it's really moving them along in that progression.
Okay.
And then,
yeah, go ahead.
And then finally is the promotion. Podcasts are evergreen content. You don't want to just record them once and then forget about it. No, share that out with your community when it first goes live, but then also, throughout time, because as people find that, it's going to bring value to them.
Okay. So I have a couple of follow-up questions. What are some tools that e-commerce businesses can use for this strategy?
Sure. And really, you're right. This is a strategy. So it's an overarching thing. Then you've got the tactics of how to go into it. And really, it doesn't need a whole lot of tools from the standpoint you're communicating back and forth with the host via email. You're searching for the podcasts just through Google, through iTunes, looking for podcasts there. Probably the easiest way to automate a lot of these things is just on the promotion and the social media, so that once you've been on a podcast, to load it up into something like we use Meet Edgar. And you can also, Hootsuite does the same thing, where you can get the promotion out of the about your interview and put that out there. But there's other tools that you can use. Content is king. So if you have a hard time writing blogs, well, you could do podcast interviews and then transcribe that interview for $1 a minute with something like rev.com. And now you've got the basis for a blog. And so you could repurpose that audio interview into a blog.
Okay. And the goal, I'm guessing, with podcast interview marketing as a strategy, the goal is to get the listeners into that progression, progress them into the funnel, get them to the funnel, and then from there, eventually lead that to the heck yes credit card. But the goal, not only is it to expose your brand, but it's to just start setting up and filling up the funnel for your business.
Very much so, Robert. And one of the things that we've seen with our clients is that after they've heard on a podcast interview marketing that the traffic converts much better than other mediums. A blog will convert 1% to 2%. We've seen with our experience podcast interviews converting visitors to leads and customers at about 25 to 50%, right? Which is understandable. If somebody's heard you for 20 minutes, they get to know, like, and trust you. And really, if you think about, how our grandparents did business, how our grandchildren probably will, who do you buy from? You buy from somebody that you know, like, and trust. And really, from somebody hearing your story, hearing why you chose to do the e-commerce business you did, really focusing on that, they get to know, like, and trust you. And that makes for great traffic back to your site.
And what are some mistakes that people should avoid when they're doing podcast interviews?
Yeah, one of the biggest things is thinking that bigger is better on a podcast, that if I get on a bigger podcast, it will do better for me. And really, this is not a shotgun exercise. This is really targeted. I always tell people there's more fish in the ocean than there are in a barrel. But if you can find that barrel of your ideal customers, man, those are the ones that you want to talk to. Almost the example, would you like to talk to everybody that's watching the Super Bowl for 5 minutes? Or would you rather talk to, your ideal customers, a conference room of your ideal customers for 30 minutes? Well, just talking to everybody on the Super Bowl, chances are none of them care what you have to say. But if you could get a conference room, an auditorium filled with your ideal customers, boy, that would be like fishing in a barrel. So from that standpoint, one of the biggest things is bigger is not always better.
Okay. Thanks for being on the podcast, Tom, and sharing this strategy, podcast interview marketing. You had shared the link again. Can you share it again?
Sure. So, everything that Robert and I talked about, I'll put back at interviewvalet.com/eCommerce. And I'll, put that checklist. I'll put the, 6 secrets to getting on your first podcast. I tell you what, even that podcast guest profits, if you want the PDF version, make that free for the listeners here. And if there's any way that we can help you at Interview Valet to allow you to be the guest and us to do the rest, we would love to work with you. We work with a lot of e-commerce companies getting their message out there and really starting to turn listeners into customers.
Okay, and can you quickly, I know we're running out of time, but can you quickly talk about your book, Podcast Guest Profits?
Yes, it's all the secrets and all the strategy and the steps that we've used in order to grow our business. Like I said, we've been doing this for almost 4 years, and it's the system behind that. I openly share this with everyone because I really think podcast interview marketing 5 years from now, Robert, is going to be common as email marketing. People will say, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't you go on to podcasts to get your message heard? And there's no better place to do that with interviews because, doing a podcast is a lot of hard work. Robert, I appreciate all you do. So really, it's our playbook that we use. It tells you exactly how we do it at Interview Valet. And from that standpoint, it's almost like the best chef giving you his recipe book. Well, this is our recipe book, knowing that a lot of people like to cook themselves. Other people just say, hey, do it for me. And that's what we do at Interview Valet. So it's really a guidebook that tells you exactly how to do it step by step with a 30-day plan. And like I said, if you want the free PDF download on it, you're more than happy to go to interviewvalet.com/e-commerce, and it will all be there. Or if you want to buy it, the hardcover on Amazon, it's there too.
Okay, again, Tom, I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you for listening to the eCommerce Marketing Podcast. Join the eCommerce Marketing Podcast Facebook group to learn, connect, collaborate, and grow with other e-commerce marketers at getosi.com/FB. Subscribe to us on iTunes by searching for eCommerce Marketing Podcast, and please leave a rating and a review. Thank you for listening. See you next time.